Today I'm going to talk about one of those mysteries that I'm concerned with, namely British big cats, and I want to specifically talk about a news story that I've referenced twice now but haven't yet covered in depth. Now, just in case any of you aren't familiar with how I got involved with the mystery of British big cats, when I was in my early 20s I had a certain circle of friends, and one of those friends lived on a farm about 5 miles outside of town, and myself and other friends would often go and visit him out there. We'd stay for a few hours and then head back into town in the early hours of the morning. On one occasion, it was myself and one other friend went out to my friend's farm. We stayed there a few hours and we headed back into town at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And as was often the case, we decided to take a shortcut across the countryside and across the fields instead of just following the road back into town. And even though we considered it a shortcut, I'm quite sure it took us far longer to clamber over all of those fences to get back into town. But regardless, on this occasion, we just finished climbing yet another fence when what I can only describe as a panther walked no more than 5 feet in front of us. And although it was obviously dark, the moon was full, so there was quite a generous amount of light being shed. So there was no mistake about what we saw, and now nearly 20 years on, I still say it was a panther. If you ask that friend that was with me at the time, he'd say the same thing. So at that time, what I had no idea about was the fact that this is a relatively widespread phenomenon. People all across the United Kingdom have seen these large cats where they really shouldn't be, and there's been different photographs and footage of them taken across the years. So this became one more mystery of many mysteries that, because of my direct experience, I became absolutely fascinated by. And I've made several efforts to obtain proof of these cats myself. And it's very difficult to do because cats are typically active at dawn and dusk, or they're most active at dawn and dusk, which means that's the best time to look for them. But cats being cats, they're one of the hardest creatures to track. And so really the best I could do was stake out water sources or stake out places that I thought would be of interest to big cats. So I've spent many long and cold nights out there in the countryside. I mentioned before that a hotspot for livestock being attacked by these creatures is a place called Betty Hill, which is a few miles west of the town of Thurso in which I live. And so that's the perfect area for me to stake out and look for these big cats. But I always knew that the chances of me actually, happening to catch, get good footage or get a photograph of one of these creatures was very slim. The chances of me being in the right place at the right time were very, very slim. But I had to try anyway, because again, I was just captivated by this mystery. And of course, people are very cynical about this whole idea that there are these unusually large cats in the United Kingdom. They're unreasonably critical of the idea. And I say that because it's like Albert Einstein said, condemnation without investigation is the highest form of ignorance. There's a difference between being skeptical and being cynical. It's good to be skeptical, meaning that you don't just accept claims without evidence. And as they say, the more outrageous the claim, the greater the evidence that is required to support it. So it's healthy to be skeptical, but being cynical is something else. Being cynical means that you have a rather negative and sneering approach to everything at face value, even if you've got no reason to have such an attitude. And people generally tend to be quite cynical towards the idea that these big cats exist, even though it's not that unreasonable a proposition. I've made I've made many more videos about this, but on this channel I've got 2 videos about these big cats. In the first video, I was approaching the subject in a grounded fashion, considering how these big cats might have arrived here in the United Kingdom where they really shouldn't be. I talked about the fact that the lynx was once native to Scotland before supposedly being hunted to extinction. I talked about laws that came in the 70s that prohibited people keeping exotic pets, and what that meant is that a lot of people let those exotic pets out into the countryside and perhaps they thrived there. So there are all kinds of perfectly reasonable explanations for how these big cats might have got there. And then in my next video, I went into the more obscure areas concerning the mythology of these big cats, the spiritual aspect of these big cats. I talked about, for example, the Celtic legend of the cat She. We would understand the cat She as being literal phantom cats or ghost cats, but to the Celts they were a form of fairy, which to us is just a spirit of some kind. So I've explored this area in all kinds of different ways, but the bottom line is that it's not like an outrageous claim to make that there could be these unusually large cats prowling different areas of countryside across the United Kingdom, and yet people treat it as if you're talking about some kind of alien invasion or something, which is of a different order of something that would require a far greater degree of evidence. But the idea that there might be big cat species in the United Kingdom is not really that incredible a claim, and yet people treat it cynically. And yet, what I found is that even though people have this cynical attitude towards it generally, if you get people on their own, and if they know that you either are open to the idea or that you accept the existence of these creatures, because as in my case, for example, you've had direct experience of them, they're willing to share stories that they would never share with anyone else, presumably for fear of ridicule. The number of people I've talked to in this local area who also have seen some of these creatures is absolutely unreal. In fact, you may recall that documentary I made about the disappearance of Finn Craney. In that documentary, I raised the issue of big cats, and I shared the fact that I'd seen one of these creatures myself. And if you go and look at the comment section of that documentary, you'll see several people from this local area again saying, yes, I also have seen one of those creatures that you have claimed to see. And so, none of this mattered to me, people's, cynical disposition towards it, because I know what I saw. And as with all of the other outlandish experiences that I've had, I don't need other people's affirmation. I don't need their approval, because I know what I experience. And proving these things is not a matter of needing to prove anything to myself. It's just because I'm fascinated by these mysteries, and I want to show people that there is far more to this world than the mundane reality that they are presented with. But again, obtaining footage or photographs of these creatures was really a tall order. There's a guy that supports me on Patreon, which, by the way, you can do for just £10 a month, and you get a whole load of bonus content. But he's over in the United States, and he happens to have a friend that traps lynx. And so he spoke to this friend on my behalf and asked him, how do you go about trapping these creatures? And his answer was not anything you would expect, because I've looked into all kinds of possibilities. There was an article some time ago that talked about how some researchers had discovered that Calvin Klein's obsession for men was a scent that was very attractive to big cats. And that's the kind of lines I was thinking along. My idea was basically just to get lots of tuna and put it in a certain place and be seated some distance away with my camera aimed at that spot. But what this person said is that he'll put up some unusual object in the area. If you've ever had a cat as a pet, you'll know that they're very curious creatures. And if you add something to your environment, especially something that's particularly unusual looking, that cat will be attracted to it and fascinated by it. And so what this guy said is that he'll essentially tie a bunch of CDs to a string and hang that string up so that the CDs kind of move about, and obviously in the sunlight they'll sparkle and things like that. And that apparently does a lot to attract the attention of these lynx, and that's how he traps them. That honestly would never have occurred to me. But fortunately, earlier this month there was a news article that shared something of a revelation, and it seems that my efforts and efforts similar to mine are now redundant. So I'm going to turn to that news article now. And the title is Cats Out of the Bag. DNA test confirms big cats are on the prowl in the British countryside. Big cats are on the prowl in the UK, and there is finally evidence to prove it. An explosive new documentary, Panthera Britannia Declassified, has revealed that black panthers and other big cats are roaming the British countryside. The shocking revelation comes after documentary makers spent years investigating sightings across the country. And now, DNA from black hair caught in a barbed wire fence following a sheep attack has offered definitive proof of the big cat's existence. The hair was recovered from a farm in Gloucestershire, where there had been some unusual predatory activity, and video footage of a large black animal captured only a few miles away from the sample was enough to raise suspicion. Forensic scientists at a top laboratory have now confirmed that the hair matches the DNA of a big cat species with a 99% match. For decades, people in Gloucestershire and across the UK have reported sightings of what appear to be black leopards. Witnesses have described them as healthy and confident, suggesting they grew up in their environment. These stealthy predators mainly prey on wild animals like deer, but they've also been reported to attack foxes, ducks, geese, and even pigeons. While they can switch to sheep, it seems that they much prefer natural game. And the article goes on, and I'll put a link to it in the description box below. Now, it had occurred to me before to look for physical traces of these creatures, but I more had in mind actual remains. The problem with that is that these creatures would have dens, and it's going to be very hard to track down their remains. And even if I had found fur caught on a fence, as these researchers did, I don't have any means of getting that DNA tested. But now, of course, I don't need to. And as far as proof goes, this is as definitive as it gets. So even if I'd managed to capture really great photographs or really great footage of one of these creatures out there in the countryside, because it's just a photograph, because it's just footage, there's always going to be a way to be skeptical of that, or to be dismissive of that evidence. But DNA, that's one of the hardest sciences imaginable. So again, this proof is as definitive as you're going to get. So you might think that a lot of people at this point would have to eat humble pie. But unfortunately, no. If you go and look on the LBC Facebook page where this article was posted, if you look in the comments, you'll see that people are being as cynical as ever about this. And it's not because they've got any way to debunk these claims, it's just because people can't accept anything that falls out of their paradigm. Some people cannot accept anything that has not been conventional wisdom for a long time. If someone has been raised to see the world in a certain way, then in most cases they can't change their perspective on the world, no matter what kind of proof or evidence is offered to show them that no, the way you understand reality, the things that fit into your paradigm, that's not entirely correct. There's actually more to reality than is in your paradigm. They simply can't accept it. This is another example of where direct experience is so important. If one of those cynics had directly encountered one of these creatures, as myself and so many others have, then they change their mind. But until that happens, they're just not going to believe it because it doesn't fit into their paradigm. And that just says a lot, because the irony is that people like that, they consider themselves very intelligent. People like that consider themselves intelligent just because they're so dismissive of anything that falls outside of conventional wisdom, so dismissive of what they would consider to be outlandish claims. They think that being dismissive and being cynical alone makes them intelligent, when in situations like this you see that it's actually the exact opposite. They are remaining willfully ignorant so that they don't have to change their own paradigm. They don't have to challenge their worldview in any way, because to accept that their paradigm or their worldview is not complete, but there's more to it, would be an acknowledgement that they themselves were wrong. And it's difficult to admit that you've been wrong, especially when you've had this really smug, condescending attitude on the subject. So this is a very important example of how some people, no matter what evidence is offered, they're never going to accept any change to their paradigm at all. And in tomorrow's Patreon video, I'm going to elaborate upon this more, as is often the case, from a spiritual and mystical perspective. I'm going to explain why it is that there are some people that have all kinds of bizarre, outlandish experiences in their life, and then there are other people that just seem to have a very mundane experience of life. There's a very good reason for that. I'm going to explain it tomorrow. But that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and God willing, I will see you again for Thursday's public video.